Okay, guys, thanks for joining us. I see a lot of new faces. Welcome. If you don't know how these calls work, we try to take just 30 minutes and we cover some topics, and we are obviously open for questions. So as a question comes up based on the topic we're talking about, please type it in the chat and then we'll hit it as we go through the topics. Or if you have something totally random, but it applies to you and maybe will help someone else, please don't hesitate, ask your question, and then we'll hit it right at the end of the call. So you're set up for the week ahead. So the big topic is, it's almost race time. What are the things you need to be thinking about now to prepare yourself to have everything in place come race day? Too many times we see people scrambling literally the days before the race. And we can get you really fit, but at the end of the day, if you're not paying attention to the details, you're still not going to have a successful race. So today we're talking about the details. And with that, we've seen people that are not fit, but pay attention to the details and do really well. And so if you want to cheat the system a little bit, today we're going to tell you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to start off. We have a lot of people coming for Texas 70.3 and Ironman Texas, and you're not living in the heat that we're getting here in Austin right now. And so what are the little things you can do between now and Texas 70.3 to set yourself up for what's probably going to be 80 to 90 degrees? Coach Harold is going to talk about that. So let's go.
Okay, welcome everybody. So let's start this conversation tonight off with some basic strategies for heat acclimation training. I want to kind of tell you what that means and what it looks like, how you can use it, some basic overarching ideas of ways to approach it. And I kind of want to start with, because heat training and heat acclimation is in the literature. It has been there for a long time, and there is a lot of articles out there. So if you did want to further your education on it, you can go to Google Scholar and just type in heat acclimation training, and just literally thousands of papers to look through and touch up on this subject. So there's a lot of science out there on it, okay? The first thing we want to realize, my biggest takeaway from heat training, is that it does improve your performance. It will improve your performance in hotter environments, but it will also improve your performance in cooler environments. So while you're doing heat training, you're actually making yourself better across the board, okay? So that's one big takeaway. Can you do too much of it? Absolutely. Yes, you can, okay? Generally, what I like to tell people who live in hotter environments, like those of us down here in Texas, is not to worry about it too much, because training through the spring and summer of Texas heat or other hot environments, you're going to get all the acclimation to heat that you need in terms of physiology, okay? So that brings me to my next point. When we're looking at heat acclimation training, we kind of want to look at it in two different categories. What's actually happening physiologically inside the body, and then our perceived effort, or how we perceive the environment. And that is also psychological and very important to the overall picture, okay? So what your body can do in terms of adapting to the heat, and then also how you perceive it and how you can just mentally push through when the pain comes and the heat is very uncomfortable, all right? Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of science there on the perception of heat training or racing in the heat, because it's just a very tricky thing to do in science when you're measuring perception of something. Whereas on the other side of it, the actual physiological adaptations that we make in heat, there's tons of literature out there, okay? When we're looking at the strategies that we want to take part in, specifically early springtime of the year, if you are living in a colder climate, you might want to go ahead and take that all the way into the summer as well, depending on where you're at. But specifically, like Natasha said, we have 70.3 Galveston and Ironman coming up here pretty quick. Both of these races can be very hot and very humid early in the year. So if you live in a cold climate right now, you should be doing some heat acclimation training, all right? Heat acclimation training can be done in two different ways. We have active and we have passive. So active heat training, we're actually doing a training session in a hot environment that we've created, whether we're in our house with the heater turned up, or we have resources to a place that we can turn up the humidity or any of those types of things, and then actually doing a training session, whether you're running on the treadmill or on your bike or what have you, on the trainer. That's an active bout of heat training, okay? And then we have passive, where you can just go and sit in a wet sauna or in an infrared sauna and get heat acclimation from just sitting there. So there are benefits to both of those, and there are detriments to both of those, okay? The benefits to heat acclimatization when you're doing something active is that you're getting the training stimulus for it. You're going to get a better perception of environmental feel while you're racing. Okay. The benefit to doing passive heat training is that you can sit in a dry sauna or a wet sauna per se. And since your body doesn't need to shunt a lot of the blood to working muscles because you're passively just hanging out, now it can really allocate the blood resources to thermoregulation, going to the skin, creating that stimulus where you can cool your body down without the worry of needing some of that blood for working muscle. Okay. So your body's shunting blood from organ systems to organ systems. And when you're doing heat training or exercise as a whole, your body needs to reserve a certain amount of blood for the working muscles. And a lot of the rest of that blood is going to go to your skin to create a cooling effect. Okay. So that cooling effect is what creates sweat and brings your body temperature down. So if you're not exercising, now you can put more of those resources to just going to the thermoregulation component of it without needing to worry so much about sending as much blood to your working muscles. So that's the benefit of that. The best strategy with the best outcomes, it looks like in the literature, is to do a combination of both. Okay. So you can get adaptation stimulus from heat training after 6 or 7 bouts of 30 to 45 minutes each. You will start to make those adaptations. So it doesn't take a lot. All right. You don't have to go out and blast yourself in a 2-hour session every time to start a physiological adaptation to heat. All right. Minimum effective dose here is going to be probably around 6 or 7 sessions, 30 to 45 minutes, and you will start to make those adaptations. So what adaptations are you making? You're increasing your blood volume through plasma, so you have more volume to sweat. Okay. You're going to reduce your sweat point. So you're going to start sweating earlier when it's cooler to keep your body cooler at a cooler point. You're going to increase heat shock proteins and mitochondria and a whole lot of other things as well. I don't want to get too deep into that. That's kind of boring. But it doesn't take as many sessions as you would think. Okay. So if you're out there blasting yourself 10 sessions over 2 weeks where you're going 2 hours each session in a hot environment, you're getting that heat acclimation and you're good to go. Okay. You don't need to do that much more. The only reason why you would want to do more is to tackle the mental component of it, right? So putting yourself in that hurt locker per se and knowing that you can endure it. Okay. The only way that some of us can learn that is by actually doing it. Some of us will maybe have a little more confidence in knowing that we can do that without having to be in that environment as long. But for most of us, I think we probably want to experience it so that we know that we can tackle it. Okay. But there is a breaking point where you're not going to get any more returns and you're just putting yourself into the fatigue locker, creating too much fatigue from it. And our performance in our training to be good. So we don't want to just, destroy ourselves by doing too much heat training. Another thing is that you want to keep those first 2 or 3 weeks of heat training pretty frequent. So you don't want to do 1 session 1 week and then 3 sessions the next week and then 1 session the next week. You want to do a 30-minute session 4 days a week for 3 weeks in a row, something like that, to really get that adaptation. Frequency is key. You don't need a lot of duration in those sessions. Like I said, 30 to 45 minutes is showing us improvement in the literature. So you don't have to do 2 hours. The 3 things that you're looking to do is improve the body's ability to thermoregulate, right? To shunt blood to the surface of the skin to cool us. Increase the plasma, increase the blood volume overall is going to help with that. We want to improve our body's cardiovascular and muscular component in terms of being able to take up as much oxygen from the blood, so we don't need as much blood volume to the muscles. That's a component of it. And then the third component is just going to be that mental component that I mentioned before, the perception of putting yourself in that hot environment and being able to push through. Okay. I know a lot of you are probably, and I follow it too. We see a lot of people doing, just crazy heat training stuff on YouTube, on their social media channels and Instagram and all that stuff. But just be a little bit wary of that. Like you don't need that much to create an adaptation. And the only reason why we're doing more than that is to kind of tackle that mental component. So if you think that you're strong in the heat and you can push through, then just do what's necessary physiologically. If you are one of us who probably need a couple more of those sessions just to make us feel confident in the mental component of it, then do a couple more, but just be careful not to put yourself too much into fatigue for actually getting the purpose of the training of what you need to do. That's just a basic overview of all that stuff. Natasha, did y'all want to open up to have any questions? I don't want to take up too much time.
Yeah, we had 2 questions, and these I get commonly, so this is good. Any extra benefit to doing a passive session, like getting in the sauna immediately after one of your normal training sessions?
That's a great question. And yes, there is literature that shows benefit to doing that because of that exact phenomenon that I was talking about earlier, because you're doing an exercise session, your body needs a certain amount of blood for working muscle, right? And then the resources are limited to what it can do in terms of shunting to the skin to cool you off and create that physiological stimulus that creates the adaptation of the thermoregulatory component of it. If you go straight into a passive session right after doing that exercise bout, now you can shunt that blood away from the working muscle to the skin and get a more robust adaptation or stimulus for adaptation for the thermoregulation component of it. If your goal for that session is to just create the muscular and cardiovascular component of heat training, then going and sitting in that passive environment like a wet sauna after a training session isn't going to do that for you. Okay. But there is benefit to going in there and sitting in there and letting your body really create an adaptation at the thermoregulatory component.
Next question, and I think you should speak to this as far as what sessions would you do heat training? And so I'll ask what Brandon asked and then expand on that. And he says, is there a formula for heat, humidity, and decreased performance? How much can heat acclimatization, whatever, acclimation, offset the decrease in performance? And then I think you need to speak to, because I've seen people do key sessions with jerseys on, no fans going versus easy sessions. Can you speak to that?
Yes, that's a great question. First off, let me talk about 2 words that you're saying, acclimation and acclimatization. Okay. For our regards to this topic, they're basically the same thing. Okay. Acclimation is the physiological acclimation that's actually happening in your body due to an environmental stress like heat. Acclimatization just talks about the adaptations that your body makes due to that climate. Okay. So it's basically 2 ways of saying the same thing when we're talking about the human body. Okay. That's the first thing. Second thing, there is absolutely the intensity of your session and the duration of your session plays a huge role in this. And basically what the literature says across the board is that you don't need a whole lot of race pace or anything above race pace efforts to create that adaptation. You can do it at 50, 60% of VO2 max, least minimum effective dose. You're going to get that adaptation. The only thing there, just like I was talking about before, is that you're not that real feel for your race effort and how it's going to hurt in a race. So if that's something that you need to mentally accomplish to tackle, then you want to do a minimum amount of race pace, or maybe even slightly above race pace for shorter durations. You would never do anything. I would never do race pace over 30 minutes in a really hot climate unless I just absolutely had to. And in terms of physiological adaptation to heat, you're not getting any extra from doing that. So basically you'll get the same adaptations at 50 to 60% of VO2 max that you get at higher intensities physiologically in the body. But when it comes to our perception of what it's going to feel like in a race, you might need to do a couple of those just to get that accomplished. Does that make sense? Is that a good answer, Brandon? Is that what you're looking for? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Something like that?
Yeah. And I'll speak to this. I always say when you decide to do something, you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of doing that thing when you're looking at consistency of overall training? And so if you're deciding that I need that mental component of, I'm going to do race pace efforts in the heat, you got to realize that there's going to be a pretty big cost to that. And it may affect your session, your run afterwards, especially as you're getting used to the heat, or the session the next day. And so if your offset is like, that's okay, I'm okay to maybe not go hard tomorrow, and then because you need that, go ahead. But otherwise, if we're looking for overall training consistency, just always, whatever you do, weigh out the costs, and then that should give you the answer of, is this worth it? Two more questions here, Jake. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you're talking about percent decrease in performance, that's a good question. Most of the literature shows between 6 and 9%, so a little bit less than 10% decrease in performance in the heat when you're not heat trained. The improvements that we saw from heat training in those environments is about the same thing. In a colder climate, you're going to improve about 5%, and then in a hot climate, you'll improve somewhere between 6 and 9, so less than 10%.
Okay. And then there's two more questions. If you did some heat training, how long will adaptations last? When would you do it
Yeah,
prior to the race?
so I would start doing some training, 2 to 3 weeks before my race with frequency, 5 to 6 times, 30 minutes or something like that. Just do part of your sessions. You can do it out before that if you want to be a little bit safer about getting it done before the race. But the answer to that question really just kind of comes down to what environment are you in on your normal training day, as the year goes on, because training itself creates a heat stimulus. You know what I mean? If you're it doesn't even have to be a super hot climate. If you're out in 60, 70 degree weather, you're training hard, you're still creating a heat adaptation, a heat stimulus in the body because your core body temperature gets so high, right? So if you, for those of us who live in Texas, once we get past the spring, we're pretty much trying to avoid the heat. We don't need to do any physiologically or rate of perception of your environment. And you really don't need to do any more at all. And you'll maintain those adaptations all the way through the year. Probably, I mean, it would have to be really cold for 2 or 3 weeks around here before we would even start to lose those things. If you live in a colder environment or at altitude, you do about 2 weeks, 3 weeks of heat training, and then you go do your race at Ironman Texas. Then you go back up to a cold climate. Then I would say you probably want to do at least 3 sessions, 2 to 3 sessions at 30 minutes a session in some kind of hot environment. You don't necessarily need a lot of intensity. And if you can do another 2 or 3 sessions in a passive environment, so you're doing 3 sessions, 30 minutes running on the treadmill in a hot room in your house that's 80 degrees. And then you're going to the gym and you're sitting in the wet sauna 3 times a week for 30 minutes at max. You'll be good.
Yeah, next question, and this is a good one. Is there any benefit if racing, say, Texas 70.3 or Ironman Texas, to come 4 to 5 days earlier and do your final race prep sessions in that warmer climate versus just doing this at home, right?
No, absolutely. That's a great idea, actually. I recommend it. If you can do it that way, get to the race a week early, 4 or 5 days early, get out and do a little bit of training. Now it has to be race week specific training. Don't go out and go smash yourself on a 5-hour bike ride, right? So if you're just going for an hour and 15 or an hour 30 bike, on the Tuesday when you're racing on Sunday or something like that, that's actually a really good idea. I would recommend it.
Yeah, and I would say don't deplete yourself. I've seen this all the time. Don't deplete yourself to where you're not drinking enough, not taking in enough sodium, number one. Number two, know when you're going to train. Like I've seen people go out at the hottest time of day, maybe 5 p.m. when it's 100 degrees to be ready for their race. And doing that race week, I feel like that's just, again, too much cost. I think you can get away with just a little bit benefit doing it first thing in the morning. Right? Would you say the same, Harold?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. Like I said, you don't need much. Most people do more than they need when it comes to heat training, physiological adaptations for sure. But I also probably would say most people do more than what they need to deal with the mental part of it as well.
Okay, we have one more question, and this is a good topic for everyone because we all face it in the summer with triathlon, is how much can you expect your heart rate to raise in hotter weather, or how much you need to decrease your percentage of performance, let's say? Yeah,
that's going to be a very similar range to what I said earlier in terms of percent performance drop. Those two things kind of almost correlate, so your heart rate's probably going to increase somewhere between 5 to 10%. So that's, if you're running at 150 beats per minute, that might be 162 beats per minute at the same pace in a hot environment, something like that.
Okay. And then just answer this question without going into too much detail, because we're going to go on to the next thing, because we're going to touch on it later. And it's Brendan says, how much sodium can your body absorb in an hour? Like, what have you seen the range?
Yeah, the upper limit on that is going to be widely variable. Individually, Brandon, you are going to be able to absorb way more sodium than most people on this call per se. So that's I wouldn't even answer that question. Go get your sweat test from Levelin and then send me the data and I'll tell you for you specifically.
Awesome. Yeah. And then last one is Lindsay said, what is the expected temperature in Galveston? What are the ranges that we've seen, Harold?
Man, Galveston can be crazy. I've been there and raced when it was storming, raining, and 60 degrees, and I've raced when it was 100 degrees and 95% humidity. So be ready for both. Start looking at the weather tracker stuff pretty early, I guess, but be ready for a cool climate with high humidity. Get ready for a hot climate with high humidity. Get ready for a windy climate.
Awesome. Yep, I agreed. Okay. Thank you, Harold. Guys, we're going to move on. I'm going to share my screen on something we send out, and I'm actually going to send it out with this call. And what this is a race day checklist. And with us being so close to race day, we need to start preparing now. And all these items on this checklist, I would recommend you get them out. You make sure there's it fits you. For example, a triathlon kit that doesn't fit you right now. If there's any extra material on your body that's not very, aerodynamic, and that's going to affect your performance on the bike. Again, some cheats to get you a little bit faster than other people if maybe the training is not there. But go through this checklist I'm going to send out and make sure that you have everything in place. And we're going to go through a couple, this is what it looks like. We're going to go through a couple of questions that I want you guys to start thinking about. And if you don't know the answer, you need to be asking your coach. And it's very important, whatever those answers are, that you start dialing it in on your final race preparation workouts. We talked last week about what are you going to fuel with? You need to pre-plan it the day before. You need to execute on your key session as if you are racing, and do that multiple times to know that you can handle it come race day. I mean, that's part of the success of being able to race well and race to your ability. So these are the things we're going to ask you that you need to be thinking about. The day before the race, what does your day look like? I highly advise you plan out essentially every single hour of the day so that you feel like you have time to rest. I feel like people don't plan and they're just rushing around all day up till 5 p.m. the day before, getting things dropped off and getting fuel, and you barely have any downtime before a big day the next day. So plan this out. I highly recommend doing everything first thing in the morning, getting out the heat, especially if it's going to be hot, to where from lunchtime on, you're at home, you're watching Netflix, feet are up, and then the only thing you have to do, the night before the race is dinner, essentially, and you do an early dinner. So be thinking about, maybe write these things down now and start experimenting with it. Maybe whatever you're going to eat for breakfast the day before, dinner the day before, do it before one of your key sessions and practice and make sure that it's going to work for your stomach. Then the same day, start thinking about race day, start looking up, when does the race start? How far is it? What's the parking situation? And then work back from there. What time I'm going to wake up? What am I going to eat? Electrolytes, etc. Again, key to just, I know for me, when I do this checklist, my anxiety and stress levels go way down, especially when it comes to the first race of the season. I feel like we're more anxious the first race because it's been a while since we've done it. And going through this list, you're like, okay, I know what to do. And, something I tell athletes when they get on calls with us is there's so many variables that you can control like this, that you need a plan for. And then on race day, you just essentially need to follow the script and the things you can control. But then, hey, what are the things that you can't control that could happen? Well, if you write it down and say, hey, if I cramp up, this is what's going to happen. If this happens, this is what's going to happen. Again, it completely eases your anxiety, but it puts your mind come race day into a let's figure out and fix this mode instead of a panic mode if you have that plan. So a couple things here you guys need to know. What PSI you're putting in your tires. Again, if you don't know, you need to ask your coach. I think some of you don't understand that your tire pick for race day makes a big difference for rolling resistance and speed. Example, there is some people that they're like, I don't want a flat, I'm going to use gator skins. That's okay. But then you have to understand, what is the cost of that? It might make you go 10 minutes slower in a 70.3 using gator skins. And then you might reconsider and say, well, I need to learn how to change a flat. And maybe you're picking a race tire that's kind of in the middle. You're getting a little bit of flat resistance, but then it's also a faster tire. And so little things like that. And then also checking your gear. I always, before every single race, took my bike into a bike shop to make sure that no issues with the tires, my bike was working correctly, and then clean it up. A clean bike is a fast bike. And if you can shave a few minutes of off your time by just doing that versus pushing 10 more watts, you want to do that. Nutrition. We all plan on nutrition, but we never think about how we're going to take it on our bike and what do we need to take from aid stations. And so as most of you know, Texas 70.3, you're going through aid stations every 15 or so to 20 miles. it's water, Gatorade. You need to be looking what's on the course. So you have to understand, okay, I'm taking 2 bottles with me. This is what's going to be in them. But then every single aid station, what am I taking based on my needs? And that you need to figure out with your coach if you don't know. And the big thing, especially where I see people get caught up in Texas and Texas 7.3 because of the heat, they're cramping. The only way you can know your sodium loss is to do a sweat test. And so we have a partnership with Levelin. You guys get 25 to 30% off. Get a patch, you sweat with it in a workout, you send it in, you get results about a week later of exactly how much sodium you're losing per liter. And then you adjust that based on the conditions for the day, how much water you've lost. And then it also advises how much you need to be drinking per hour. And we always note that a lot of people underhydrate. And then that's what sets them up for a bad run. We have too many people that go to a race, they swim well, they bike well, and maybe they pace the bike really well, but they didn't nail hydration and sodium. They have a bad run, and then they come to us and say, my run sucks. I'm like, well, no, you didn't fuel your bike. So let's nail that down. And then as you can see here, little Texas 70.3 Ironman Texas example, to walk to the start is like 20 minutes. So you again need to like be planning back, knowing you have a really long walk to the start. And what are you going to do? Maybe that's part of your warm up. Maybe you're going to jog. Again, start planning that now. Yeah. And then you can see all these different things. I'd say how it pertains to training is outside of the fueling aspect. Before workouts, during workouts, it's pacing, it's heart rate, it's power, it's cadence, all these things that are in your control that you can focus on during the workout. Or what is your mindset? For swimming, for example, I always have 1 or 2 cues that I focus on that keeps me present. And I know if I focus on those 2 things, I'm swimming to the best of my ability versus something else. And so when you're doing these race pace sets, you know, maybe you're thinking about your head in a certain position at 80% effort, and that brings you in at 130 per 100. And now you're focusing on maybe a higher stroke rate, and that's bringing in you in at 135 per heart rate, per 100. Well, now you know that higher stroke rate is not better than you just focusing on your head position, which is in turn fixing your body position. You can be your own coach through these things as we dial it in. Again, let's see some other things. You know, when am I starting? A lot of these races, obviously Texas is a rolling start, but if they're doing wave starts, is Texas 70.3 a wave start or rolling start? Does anyone know? We need to check, you know, rolling. I think it's rolling start. So basically it's you line up where you think you're going to take off at. And so you need to, yeah, again, prepare. People start lining up way early across the board. You need to be there early. Here are a couple things on the bike you could focus on. Sodium, carbs, where are the sources coming from? What are you going to take at aid stations? If it's your first Ironman, special needs, what goes in special needs? Again, ask your coach. Preferred race cadence, you need to be practicing that. You know, I see too many people sitting at 65 to 70 RPM on the trainer indoors because that's what feels efficient for them. And then they get to race day and they're trying to spin it like 90 RPM and they wonder why they're inefficient. Their heart rate is through the roof. You need to be practicing what you're going to do come race day. You need to know how's your power, your effort going to change in a headwind, in a tailwind. Start visualizing what that's going to look like because that drastically affects your strategy going into the race. Here's a couple things. Do you know how to change a tire? If you don't, let's start looking that up. Again, what happens if you cramp, if you're sick to your stomach, if you overheat, how do things adjust? And then the final part of the run, again, special needs, what are you going to use? What are the what ifs, and how are you going to fuel? And then we always like to say mindset, you know, set mindset goals at the ends. What does success look like? You know, for you, that might be driving. These next couple of weeks are going to be really hard. You're going to get tired and maybe we lose a little motivation through that fatigue. If you write down right now, what is your why? What does success look like? And visualize that, you know, have it on your mirror, have it on your fridge. That's going to get you through these next couple tough weeks. Okay. So we'll send this out. Hopefully it's helpful. You have any questions? Please ask your coach now, prepare it, and you should be set up for a great day. Does anyone have any questions? Has an option for international. Good, Chris. Okay. Anyone questions? Any coaches want to add to anything? Okay. Nope. I think we
Here, I'll add something real quick, Natasha, before we let everybody go.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention this earlier on the heat training. When you are doing the passive heat training and you're sitting in a sauna, Basically, there are 3 different types of saunas. One is the dry sauna that's just a hot room that you sit in. One is the wet sauna where the humidity's cranked up real high. And then the other one is the infrared sauna. It's kind of like getting in the microwave where there's infrared that is warming you up from the inside out. So the environment actually isn't hot. So when you're thinking about the perception of these environments, say if you're going to do the Ironman Texas in the Woodlands where the humidity is going to be high, you can bet on that. Then maybe doing that protocol in a wet sauna is a better option than the other 2. So just think about that as well.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. You guys, it's 6:30. So we're going to let you go. We, of course, will send out this recording if you need to go back and review any of it. And then coaches, if you can stay on for just 1 minute after the call, that would be great. Okay. Bye, you guys. Have a great week. Thanks for hopping on.